Small business owner, remote worker, entrepreneur, have you heard of Coin Coworking? It's Huntsville's latest hidden gem and inspiring an affordable community workspace. Situated in the beautifully renovated Lincoln Mill campus, just minutes from downtown, Coin is the ultimate co-working space in Huntsville, offering creative yet professional workspace, an unmatched networking community, and affordable membership pricing. Your business will have zero problems adding a little coin to your bottom line. Consider Coin your all-inclusive resort for professional workspace. You simply pay an affordable monthly membership and you unlock amazing amenities, including professional, modern, and complete workspace, team meeting spaces, air printers, copiers, and scanners, Google Fiber Wi-Fi, locally sourced drip coffee, and so much more. From affordable flex space memberships to private office options and everything in between, Coin Coworking has exactly what you need to be excited about work again. Take care of your office space headaches and you can focus on achieving your career goals. Declare your independence from your current drab and boring office setup today and schedule your tour of Coin Coworking. Learn more about Coin and schedule your tour today at coincoworking.com, and all this information will be in the episode notes. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Rockets. Today I sit down to talk with Matt McLellan, owner and founder of Absolute Nutrition, who prides themselves on being the #1 no BS sports nutrition store in the South with locations in Madison, Decatur, Huntsville, plus their online store. They have the coverage and convenience to provide the North Alabama with the best products, knowledge, and prices guaranteed. First off, thank you for taking the time to sit down and talking with me. As Huntsville's continuing to grow and expand, more and more people I talk with aren't originally from the area. They moved here for work or family. Are you originally from here, or did work or family bring you here as well?
Yeah, so I grew up actually in Decatur, so just outside of the area. That's where I was for the majority of my life, kind of first grade on until college.
Okay.
Then first couple of years of college was actually at UAH here in Huntsville.
Okay.
Ended up transferring and finishing up down in Auburn, and then came back to the area in Decatur, which is where I kind of kicked off my career.
Yeah. So did you always? I mean, a lot of people I talk with that have grown up in the area or been around in Huntsville area, Decatur area for a long time. They often, when they get ready to graduate high school, they'll say, "Hey, I'm never coming back to the area. The area is not for me. There's not enough going on." Did you always think you were going to come back after college, or was it kind of just the opportunity kind of brought itself to you?
I really didn't have a mindset one way or the other. It was really open to pursuing whatever I wanted to pursue, right? And so wherever that took me is where I was going. Obviously, as a freshman and sophomore at UAH, in engineering is where I began. Huntsville was pretty attractive, right? And even more so back then in 2004, 2005 than it is now. But so I didn't really know where that was going to place me long term. As I finished up in Auburn, it was take me literally anywhere, right? and in 2008 when I finished up, there were not many jobs to be had, not many internships to be had. Mm-hmm. At the time, I'd had an internship lined up that fell through in Austin, Texas. So I was literally up for whatever and wherever the world took me. I believe I actually was looking for internships in Korea at one point with Samsung, just trying to find anything.
So did you finish up with an engineering degree from Auburn?
No.
Is that what you, okay. So
no.
What did you finally finish up your career when you transferred to Auburn, and kind of what were you doing when you first came back to Decatur?
Yeah. So to be honest, when I was at UAH, I ran cross country at UAH and I was in computer engineering at the time, always been a bit of a geek. And so that side of things interested me, went through a lot of the programming classes and things like that. And, after we got out of kind of the very, very basics to the next step, I realized that if I did this for the rest of my life, I might jump out of a window.
Yeah, I was in the same boat. I did computer science at UAH and got an internship and was like, this is not for me. I can't just sit here at this desk and type away at the computer and just be just not for me. So it's interesting to see that you kind of had that same sort of mentality.
Totally. And it wasn't one of those things where, my brain works that way. I love to problem solve, but just like you said, sitting behind a desk, basically chipping away at a computer all day long and that being the monotonous task in front of me just did not interest me. It didn't really feed my passions and interests. And so at the time I remember going home and just kind of Googling some things and just literally putting words out there or ideas. And I landed on a program called industrial design. And I was like, okay, well, where can I go for that? And, it was basically like, you can go to SCAD or you can go to Auburn University. And I was like, all right, well, that's my next stop. And so then I started making efforts to find what it would take to transfer and move to Auburn to pursue that. So as I came in, I guess I came in at like a second or third year at that point. I kind of went through a fast track program called, it was an environmental design fast track.
Okay.
Really kind of mislabeled, but essentially I was just jumping in with classmen that were underneath me, going through the same education and programming that they were going through, and learning all of the pieces of industrial design. And so the fast track purpose of that is to then go to grad school.
Okay.
And so I learned a lot in this program, finished up barely, if we're honest. And my plan was to go to grad school because you didn't really finish up and have anything worthwhile as that degree. It is a degree. It is a 4-year degree. But it just doesn't really speak to any specific job opening. Now, I say that is that was the way it was designed. However, had my skills really shined through, I could have found a job somewhere, right? If there were availability. But I planned on going to grad school. That didn't pan out. I did not get into grad school.
And this is 2008 at this time?
Yep, 2008. Okay. And so I moved back home, you know, and then I took about a week break to just like go visit a buddy at the beach and then come back. And, you know, about 30 days into living back at home, parents are kind of like, all right, Matt, time to get a job.
So like, what are you going to do now?
Right. Well, and I didn't know what I was going to do, right? I guess I'd set my hopes in this internship that fell through. And so I hadn't really planned any further, right? People started looking for jobs early in that spring semester as they were graduating, and I was not because I knew where I was going. And then that fell through, and so I was kind of dumped back on my ass, and it was like, what are you going to do now?
Yeah.
And so, I ended up kind of going back into what I knew. I worked at, Home Depot and during college. So I actually went to go work at Lowe's in commercial sales for a little while. You know, it was a skill set that I had. I could work there in the time being while I continued to search for jobs. And so, you know, very quickly after that, I'm in a couple different positions at Lowe's at the time. I have a buddy of mine who has restaurants in the area, Mexican restaurants, and was opening another location, who offered me the opportunity to go and manage his new location.
Okay.
And it was really just one of those things where I was a buddy that he trusted, right? Because I had zero management experience.
Yeah. Especially not in have you ever worked in a restaurant prior to that? Like, did you even have like restaurant experience at all?
Sure, fast food.
Okay.
But it's a totally different ballgame, right? I had never been a server before. So I originally told him no, because I really had my heart set on the ideal position in my mind that I was worth and I wanted to pursue. And then after another month of mulling it over, it was like, hey, actually, I do want to do this. Like, where I'm at sucks, and it's time for me to do something else. Let's give it a shot. And so I left Lowe's. I think Black Friday was my last day, thank God. And then I left there and went to work with him at his current restaurant and kind of learn the ropes, right? What are the responsibilities of the servers? What does it look like? You know, and so I worked there for a period of months while we worked on getting the new location open. And then I took over that location. And I wish I could tell you the exact time frame I worked there. I will tell you that I was working over 80 hours a week at the time for that job, because there was a lot to be done.
And was this like early 2009 at this point, you think, or is this?
Yes. So this was the spring, I think March, April 2009 time frame.
Okay.
And so I ended up working there, working a whole lot of hours. I did everything from hiring in servers to writing a server manual. And it just became one of those things where I didn't know what I was doing. So I was just searching the internet for answers, right? Trying to see, all right, well, I have to give these people roles and responsibilities, or do and do nots. And so what does that look like?
Yeah.
What are other people's
roles?
What
roles do they typically have? Like, because like you didn't really have any sort of like framework to say, hey, here's what it typically looks like in this role and this responsibility that you had there, and this is how you manage this staff. It was like, hey, go.
Right. And you know, that's kind of the higher level view of it. Even the interviews was not something I had experience doing, right? So I'm Googling interview questions, right, and trying to get myself comfortable with what that looks like. So thankfully I'm somebody who's always looked for answers and done a lot of research. And so, seeking through the internet and trying to figure out what I need to be doing was at least a solid starting point, right? And so I was able to get my feet underneath me, so to say, get going. It was a lot of work. I felt kind of unsupported at the time, so we ended up having kind of a falling out for a short period of time. I left there, just kind of, said, I'll figure something else out. And then one day I was in the gym. My dad and I worked out at a small gym in Decatur, and I was at the gym and I thought about opening a nutrition or supplement store, like kind of a smaller pro shop in this gym. I had a pitch idea that I wanted to pitch to the owner. I kind of ran it by my buddy and said, hey, would this be something you might want to do? And he's like, yeah, we could do that. And so I approached the owner one day right after my workout and said, hey, this is what I'd like to do. Here's how I think it would work. And I, basically you would be pretty hands off, other than I would stock the product. I'd make sure everything is here. I set the pricing and I pay you either a rent or commission for it. Your staff sells it. I settle up with you every 2 weeks or so.
It was a pretty quick, at least it sounds like it was pretty quick from when you had this initial, like, I think this would be nice, I think this would be cool to have, to when you actually pitched. Like, was it that quick of a process, or was there more sort of a a mulling over phase that you kind of were like, oh, this idea, and then you kind of let it go, or was it really that quick?
Yeah. So if you know anything about me, or for those that know me, like I do things fast. And so when I have an idea, it doesn't usually mull around for a long time before I'm already trying to execute it.
Okay.
And so if I feel like it's a good idea, then I just push into it.
Just run. Okay.
Right. And so it really was that quick of a turnaround. I would say, roughly a month from the time of exiting the one job to wanting to pursue the next one. And, as I approached the owner for this basically bare bones plan that I had laid out in my brain, I was turned down, and it really kind of ticked me off, because I felt like I was treated like I was a little kid in the moment. And, to be frank, I was 22 years old, so I kind of was a little kid, but it really fired me up. And so I left the gym that day, pulled out of the parking lot, and I was not 100 feet from the space when I saw a for rent sign in a window at the plaza right next door to this.
Wow. So
I pulled in, I called the number, and I spoke with someone on the phone about seeing the space, and they said, hey, I can meet you there in about 15 minutes. So, all right, well, so I think I just kind of drove around in circles for 15 minutes and just was like, this is interesting, right? I'm in gym clothes and whatever. And so I came back. I remember going in the space, checking it out, kind of thinking about, hey, the smoothie bar could be laid out here. We could knock down this wall so there's a little bit more retail space. And I had a visual in my head of what this could look like. And that visual kind of came from, I shopped at a place when I was down in Auburn called Nutrition First. And it was a little bit more edgy nutrition store. He literally had like an MMA gym in the back where he trained people and trained them well. They were actually known for it, but that was kind of their calling card there. But it was more of a wholesale style where you weren't looking at like big MSRP prices you might find at somewhere like GNC. You were looking at a lot more discount prices, right? Okay. So obviously that business model worked well for him. I remember as a college student too, it was very comparable to the online stuff, and no one ever waited, planned ahead of time, like, okay, I'm going to be out of protein in 10 days. Yeah, I need to order now. Right. You're out and you're like, well, crap. Yeah. And so I really missed having something like that close by. I think since I had been in Decatur, I had gone to GNC just out of like, I need this stuff. Yeah. So I've gone to restock some protein. It's just like the garbage products that they carried there, the prices they had, nothing was worthwhile. And so I was like, we can do this better. Yeah.
And there was no other like sole sort of like mom and pop or local nutrition store in the area at the time.
Oh, no.
It was just GNC. And I mean, I would probably assume too, even Huntsville didn't have really too many local places either. Like, I mean, did you look in the area? It's like beyond just Decatur when you were coming up with this idea for Absolute Nutrition, or were you just kind of looking at that time just in that Decatur area?
Yeah. So at the time I was looking at Decatur because I lived at home. Right. Yeah. And so I didn't really have any means to do much else. Mm-hmm. And, at the time, there were a lot of places that were kind of in the naturopathic space. Like there's some very long-term brands here in Huntsville that have been in the naturopathic, space for a long time. Same thing in Decatur, like Gloria's Good Health, Nature's Apothecary, Ruth's Nutrition, all of those places, but they didn't really serve the sports nutrition need. Yeah. And that was where I was focused, right? It was kind of a blossoming market at the time. It was growing a lot. It was something that I was passionate about as a young athlete looking to progress, right? And so I kind of came up with an idea on this. I had a brief bout with lease negotiations when I worked with my buddy. I watched him literally, walk through the space for what was that Mexican restaurant later on and recommend, hey, well, would you do this for the lease pricing per month? And so with that little bit of knowledge that I had and experience, I kind of took the same approach. I'm like, hey, could you do this price for 6 months and then this price for the next 6? So, well, let me run it past my father and I'll let you know. Okay. And so from then, I remember, a couple of weeks later, I was on my way to a concert somewhere. I think it was Dave Matthews in Atlanta or something like that. And I remember getting a phone call, and it's an older man on the phone, and I can barely understand what he's saying. And he just got a very deep, kind of raspy voice. And he says, well, Matt, I think we can do that. You think you can do what?
Yeah, there's no context to this.
There's no context. and I really have no idea who's on the other end of the phone. And he says, I think we can do the price for the space you mentioned. And I remember it just resonated and hit in my brain. I sat up straight in my seat in my car and I was like, oh, yes, sir. Okay. And he's like, when do you think you could come talk to us about it? And so we set a date for me to go in. I think it was around like May 18th or something like that of that year. And so I go in to talk to them that day. I think that I've got to kind of pitch my idea and, discuss what it is I want to do and make sure they can sign off on it, right? Like I'm looking for their approval here. I'm not just like giving them an idea of what it's going to be, which, there's always some of that when you're looking at lease negotiations. You want to make whoever's leasing the building wants to make sure that you're going to fit with what else they have going on.
In that whole space too. Yeah.
Yeah. And also that it sounds like it'll last. Right?
Yeah.
I think if I had gone in there at the time and told them I wanted to sell Pokemon cards, they may not have thought that was a business.
It might not have worked.
But there's a lot of success to those businesses these days, right?
100%.
So, very quickly into it, they're just nodding, saying, yep, sounds good. And they slide a 1-page legal document across the table to me, literally slid it across the table and said, all right, Matt, well, why don't you look over this lease real quick and see if you agree with everything. If you do, just sign right down there at the bottom and you get the security deposit and we'll be good to go. And at this point, I'm in further than I meant to be.
Yeah.
I don't really have a plan. I don't really have any kind of financing lined up. I am stuck and I'm too embarrassed to back out. So in true Matt fashion, I sign, date it, and I slide it back across the table. They slide a key across the table, tell me the deposit amount, and I go across town and basically empty half of my bank account to give them the security deposit for this.
And the time you're still living at home with your parents, right?
I am.
Okay.
Right? So I don't have a lot of expenses, but I don't have a lot of money or income either.
Yeah. You kind of need a little bit of both. Yeah.
And I had asked for some time to get this up and going before I started to pay rent, of course, which they were, hey, once you get going, we'll start rent at that time.
Okay.
It was kind of open-ended, right? Because at this time, again, the economy is in a little bit of a weird spot, right? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of places for rent and for lease. And so more or less just having a tenant that was going to be moving forward, they're excited as landlords, right? So I remember driving across town shortly after that, and I went to the space. I opened the door. I walked in, and I was like, "What have you gotten yourself into this time?"
Yeah, because did you even have was the name Absolute Nutrition something you already had in how much of that business model did you have when you were going to thinking you were going to have to pitch it to them? How much of it did you have, and how much of it were you just kind of saying the right words to hopefully get the space?
Yeah, so I had actually tossed around names, and a friend of mine actually had helped me come up with Absolute Nutrition, but at the time I was tossing around all kinds of things, right? And so I had no idea. I knew I wanted to be a discount nutrition shop. I had no idea how it was going to make money, what the profit structure was going to look like, and the business as a whole. I just knew I was going to put products on a shelf, and I was going to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, because it's crazy that, you're 22 maybe at this time, 22, 23, it's May, June of 2009, and you're just ready to have this idea and start this company, and they're just sure, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And you really had no sort of here's how you get it from the distributor, here's how you get this model, here's how you do any of that.
None of it.
Did your parents have sort of how did you what was that next step of, okay, hey, you have the key to this place. It's a blank slate. There's plenty of opportunity for you to do whatever you want in it. You can make it yours. What did you do next?
Yeah, so I can't even remember what the conversation looked like with my parents, but I will tell you that they are much more risk averse, and that this would be a crazy idea that they would try to talk me out of many, many times. And so I remember shortly thereafter, I was like, well, I got to figure out how this works. I'm going to drive to Auburn and go ask Will how he does it. And so that's what I did. I went to Auburn the next week. And I spent a weekend there, and I went into Will's store, and it's not like he knew me well as a customer or anything. He has hundreds of college kids that come in this place, and I'm asking these questions. I'm like, hey, I'm opening a nutrition store in Decatur. Would you mind sharing who your vendors are and what your pricing structure is? To which, of course, he looks at me like I'm crazy. Just as I would, if someone came in and asked me those same questions, I would look at them the same way and be like, are you trying to compete with me? What is your MO here?
Yeah, for sure.
And so, he kind of side-eyed me and he was a little skeptical, gave me very light answers. And I was like, hey man, straight up, I have leased a spot in Decatur, Alabama. It is 300 miles away from you. I am not coming to compete with you. I just have no idea what I'm doing, and I would appreciate any help. Yeah. And so then he opened up a little bit more and provided me with some vendor names, some of the distributors that he worked with, some of the, his best-selling products, obviously, what his profit margins looked like, which was trash, by the way. And, basically, I had a very rough underlying structure of what this business could look like.
Yeah.
And so that was my initial format that I took into doing this. I called all of those vendors, right? Sent out several of them, which did not even return my phone call.
Because who's this 22-year-old calling me about a nutrition store? They already were like, nah, I'm okay.
Well, and this is a pretty small industry, right? Even as big as it is, it's also a very small industry at the same time. So it's one of those things where, a random new nutrition store wasn't just popping up out of nowhere at that time. It's much different now. But so you know, once I think I name dropped him even a couple times, and I finally got my foot in the door in a couple places to actually talk to me.
Yeah.
And so then, you know, shortly thereafter, you know, I start on very meager beginnings. You know, this company, one of the distributors out of Atlanta, even offers me some terms on products to kind of get going, which was great. Things like that would not happen at this point in time, right? You'd have to have a much bigger credit reference or some bank notes or something to back you up. I didn't really have a lot other than my word and a handshake, and that worked out back at that time.
Wow.
And so I was very fortunate that I had the leniency and kindness of some of those vendors to kind of help me get going, because, you know, when we opened up, we had maybe 2 of every product on the shelf, right? It was not a lot of inventory at all. And it was more curated to what I felt like people were looking for, both in the more popular products that I saw selling or liked, as well as I had conducted some surveys in the gym, just kind of one-on-one, printed out some surveys and said, hey, do you buy supplements? If there was a place locally that sold them for, you know, 15 to 30% off retail, would you be interested? What kind of products are you buying? Right? How often are you buying them? And then I got a very little bit of understanding of what people were looking for through that survey piece. But I still remember there was one specific product that I brought in for one guy at the gym. And this is just a, you know, kind of a small learning lesson, right? I see this one thing. I'm like, this guy buys this exact product. So I brought in that exact product, and every time I saw him, I let him know I had it. He never came in to buy that product, right? But I was so hopeful that one product that I had that one guy
would get you a customer, but it
would
never
gain me a customer, right? Anything, because I would do anything to try to find a customer that I could connect with, right? And so I would approach customers in the gym back then and ask them, you know, I see a shaker bottle full of red liquid. What is that? You know, what are you drinking there? Hey, well, just to let you know, I have a nutrition store right here next door. Be happy to, you know, take care of you on products like that. We do have that product. We've also got some other ones in that category. And that's really how I started. It was a very close-knit, small networking style thing until we started to grow and gain some traction.
So I mean, like at the time, was all the funding just what you were able to bring in, or were you able to kind of reach for outside funding to kind of make that initial upfront cost? I mean, like I would assume that, I mean, you had to do the build out process of the actual location, product cost, employee cost. Like, what did that look like? Because I mean, at the time, you said you had to empty half your bank account just to like get the space. So like, how did that look like to then make it from then to make it actually opening up the doors?
Yeah. So, well, the employee cost was me. There was no one else, right? But as far as the build out, I pinched pennies as far as I could pinch them. My countertop at the time that was in there for the smoothie bar cost me a whole whopping $45 from Habitat Restore. And it was just, I literally went in there and found the one I could find the most of one color. And then I took it and cut it and pieced it together as easily as I could.
Wow.
So it was just, you know, try to make it work how you can. When I was in Auburn, I did have a former coworker who was interested in being a part of this with me, and you know, said, "Hey, this would be something I'd be interested in being a part of if you'd be willing." And so, you know, at the time, I kind of thought, I'm just going to go to a bank and get a bank loan. Yeah. Nobody would have approved me in 2009 as a 22-year-old who has this risky business venture, right? And not to mention that I was bad at procrastinating at the time, and so writing a business plan and sitting down and fleshing all that out would have never happened without a teacher breathing down my neck and forcing me to do so. So this was kind of my in. And so, you know, I partnered up with this person at the time. You know, again, we started just with very, very little, right? I even leveraged, you know, I knew the former paint rep from one of the companies that I worked with at Home Depot and Lowe's. And so he gave me a hookup on some paint for the store. And then you know, I knew the old sales managers at some of these locations too. So I got some discounts on some of the industrial shelving, right? I stretched those dollars as far as they could possibly go. And then once we started bringing in a little bit of money, I would slowly add little by little what I could, right? Okay. But it still took some time to be able to pay its own bills, let alone anything for me. Right?
When do you think, like, I mean, you opened the doors in 2009, I guess, probably that summer 2009, fall 2009. When do you think that success, or that, do you remember the moment when you were like, okay, this is really working out? Like, you know, hey, we're maybe even like we're breaking even, or we're becoming profitable, or whatever that might look like. Do you remember that moment, or was it just kind of like things were just moving so quickly that you were just trying to hold on?
Quickly would not be the word I would use to describe it. Getting by would be the way I would describe that at the time, right? I think even those first 6 months or so, that person I had partnered with was paying the rent, right? To make sure that we were able to cover bills. We just weren't making a lot of profit. And so I think that next year in 2010 is where it started to grow a little bit more. At that point in time, that partner had disappeared. I mean, literally there was no communication, couldn't get a hold of them. And so it was like, well, the bill has to be paid. So just going to have to make it work. And I think at some point when it transitioned to kind of having to make itself work, it just did. And so I made it work. And yeah, so shortly, I think mid to late 2010 is when I started to branch out a little bit from my initial structure, try some different things, look at some more specialized products that I felt good about. And that was where we really started to blossom and gain a different interest from our clientele and started to grow. And then by that, I think 2011 was when we really started that very winter of 2010, the spring of 2011 is when we really started to finally take off. So almost 2 years later, and grow significantly, and grew significantly so fast in a period of 6 or 7 months that the idea of opening a second store sounded good.
Wow. So, I mean, and so like at this point, I guess you're 25 maybe?
I think I was
24.
You know, when I first started, I was either 21 or 22. And so I think at that point, yeah, 23, 24. Okay,
and then, and you're seeing that success from that first location in Decatur. The idea of opening up another location seems amazing. Like, it was super stressful to open up the first location, but let's just do another location.
Yeah.
And the idea of opening up a location in Madison kind of became possible. Was that, I mean, obviously it wasn't necessarily part of the business plan when you first opened. You were just trying to stay alive, stay afloat, get the boat floating. And the boat started floating, the boat started sailing, and you're like, let's sail to Madison and open up a location.
Absolutely.
What did that process look like? And like, was the knowledge and the lessons you learned with opening up the Decatur location, were you able to apply those and it went way smoother at Madison, or were there other unforeseen things with opening that location that you didn't expect?
Yeah, so I had met a couple other fitness-related businesses in the area, and so I had been looking for a while. I met with another buddy of mine from college that was also kind of getting back into working out at the time. He'd actually trained at the same gym as me down in Auburn, and we decided we wanted to partner up and open a store.
Okay.
And so then we pursued opening one in Madison. We looked around, and then one night just happened to stumble upon a space. It was like, this is perfect. This is exactly where we want to be. We're off the main road, which would later become a train wreck because it was off the main road, right? But so, you know, we felt good about moving forward on this. Obviously had a lot more capital to put into this second business. And try to start it off on the right foot this time, rather than just, you know, totally scraping by. It was still scraping by, don't get me wrong, but it had much more. We were able to make it look very nice, kind of lay it out the way we wanted to make it look. And then at the time, I hired a former employee from Vitamin Shop to go and run my Decatur location while I would take on the Madison one to grow that.
Okay.
There was a big misnomer there in kind of thinking that I could just pick somebody up and place them in my old position and let it go just as successfully as when I was there. And it just was not the case. Their understanding in salesmanship and customer service was not what I offered, right? And so while I could grow the new location, essentially I was personally footing the bill for paying this other person, running this other location as sales started to decline.
Wow.
And so I came up with a really haphazard partnership structure at the time, and my buddy would laugh. You know, he's no longer a partner with me. That did not last more than about 18 months or maybe less. But, you know, we came up with this idea of like amount of capital in times amount of hours you could work, and that was going to be your partnership percentage. It was really, really haphazard. But, you know, at the end of the day, I ended up footing this major cost for a salaried manager to be out there in Decatur to run that location. As sales declined, I'm trying to grow this other location, not really being able to pay myself as much here. And it was just, it was chaotic, right?
Yeah.
I had no systems. I had only what I knew, right? And I learned as I went. And so obviously when another nutrition store that was a former customer of mine opened up out in Huntsville, Alabama, shortly thereafter, and then failed, and that landlord called me and said, hey, do you want to open up here? I was like, well, yeah, of course I would like to do that. Why wouldn't I? And actually, it wasn't that simple. He called me and said, hey, I think there's a market here. I've even still got some inventory left over. I'll give you a couple free months rent to get started. And I'm kind of like, well, why not? Why not try it, right? I don't have my feet under me right now. Why wouldn't I have another thing on my plate?
100%.
Which is kind of the story of my life. But and so I pursued that other location then, opening up a third location there, you know, within that 2.5 year time frame from initial conception. And then coming to that next year, looked at another opportunity inside of a gym as a pro shop, which I hoped would really blossom and become something much bigger, which later then separated and moved to its own standalone Huntsville store.
Okay.
So yeah, at one point in time, I guess in that roughly year to 14 months or so, I opened up 3 locations. So I went from 1 to 4 in a little over a year.
Wow.
And I still had no systems or procedures, and it was pure chaos.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to blend as an entrepreneur, your work and your like work life and your home life, or just the separation of the two. It's really easy just to become, it's just one big chaotic mess. Did you feel like it was that way? And when did you maybe feel like as though, hey, there is some separation, or is there ever been separation for you and you're kind of just all in?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the time I didn't have much of a life outside of work, right? I mean, the work was me and I was the business, right? And so I was able to put in a ton of hours. I didn't have a family or a wife or anything that I had to take care of, any major responsibilities. And so I was able to pour a lot of me into it. But, very quickly I found myself spending, 70, 80 hours a week running everything, and I just, there was a lot of understanding of how to become a manager that I still lacked, right? I didn't have any experience in those things. So I was literally learning on the fly, stepping in shit, making mistakes, making bad hires, or just mismanaging because I didn't know any better. Yeah. So it was really trial by fire, right? It was one of those things where I just had to do the best that I knew how to do. And, sometimes that was about all I could do, is just try to stay above water. And thankfully I had a lot of really good team members during those times that really helped me stay above water, because if I hadn't had those people on my team, it would not have worked out. And so, I mean, I see young entrepreneurs all the time now who have a much better head on their shoulders, or experience, or just better leadership potential than I did in those times. But man, it was just one of those things where I would just I would be treading water as hard as I could.
Yeah. I mean, because obviously the success, and we've had you on the podcast prior talking about your other company's success, but you're running around at this point, you're 3 years into this business, 3 years into this idea, and you have 4 locations, 4 different things, and you're constantly just running between the 4. At what point, did it take a year? Did it take 2 years? Is it still a work in progress today, where you feel like as though, you're comfortable with what's happening at the Decatur store? Like, you're comfortable with the leadership you have there, and you're comfortable with what's happening at the Huntsville store, what's happening in the Madison store? Or is there still that sort of, you're constantly juggling the 3?
Yeah. So there was a period of time where, like I said, I was just kind of running by the seat of my pants. And at some point I started to implement procedures. I believe some of my employees at the time kind of said, hey, we need more structure around this. Yeah. Right. And so
it's nice to have that feedback. I mean, sometimes people don't want to give that because they're like, oh, you're the boss, it's your thing, I shouldn't tell you how to do it. But sometimes that, like, hey, this isn't really working, let's pivot, let's change, is a nice thing to hear sometimes. It might be tough to hear, but it's a nice thing to be given.
Totally. And I always appreciate good pushback, right? Yeah. As long as both sides understand that there may be a different answer at the end than either one of you expects. And that could be me, that could be them. But so having that pushback allowed me to slowly put little things together, right? What ordering procedures look like, what inventory needed to look like in the stores, what, just little tidbits, what even scheduling would, and I scheduled everybody for years, which was a nightmare for multiple locations, and so at some point, probably around 2014, 2015, I started to extract myself from the day-to-day and working in the stores to being able to do a little bit more management outside of the stores.
Okay.
And that presented its own challenges as well. But, we started to put systems into place over time and really start to become a little bit more of a business. But we still did not have everything together. I would say that, the systems and procedures that we have implemented in the last 2 or 3 years are probably some of the best that we've been, right? Okay. We continue to improve and to kind of iterate on what is working better, what is better training procedures, what are better operational procedures, right? What are these expectations? So it's always evolving, right? Yeah. And unless you have someone dedicated to specifically sitting down and coming up with what your needs are, they're always going to evolve a little bit in any business. And so being open to almost having your ear to the ground, listening for those things or looking for those opportunities, right? When something breaks, that's a good opportunity to go fix it and fix it the right way, not just put a Band-Aid or patch on it. And so I think every time something broke, I would try to take the time to go and try and give a real fix, or at least the best fix that I knew how to do at the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that was instrumental in allowing us to keep going and moving forward, because inevitably there was another problem around the corner. Yeah. So, yeah.
I mean, so when you were working on putting these playbooks and these procedures and these systems in place, would you implement them at all the stores at all the same time, or would you slowly, hey, bring this into the Decatur market, into the Decatur store, and see how this works? And then if it works, then we'll bring it into the Huntsville and the Madison. Or did you just say, hey, this is a procedure I think as a company we can benefit from. Let's just try it out at all 3 locations.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm kind of fast and aggressive, right? So it's like, oh, this is a good idea. I spent all night fleshing this out. Hey, today we're putting this into place, right? And so I'm sure that, working with me was kind of tumultuous, having me just implement those things. If you've watched the show New Amsterdam on Netflix, the medical director of New Amsterdam Hospital is very much that way. He's like, all right, well, you know what? Today we're changing it and we're doing it this way. And he just drops it on the whole hospital like, this is the new procedure. And everybody's like, are you freaking kidding me? Right? And I'm sure it was very much that same style working with me at the time. I tried to be more cautious about my approach these days, and try to ease things in or do things one at a time as they make sense. But it's very hard to harness my brain and not just go full throttle.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so like, as in the last few years, I mean, do you think that the growth and the expansion of all these different locations, and maybe have you continued to see I feel like there's a lot of educational aspect of what you do. Because I mean, someone like myself, like I ran in high school, ran cross country and track. Like running is still kind of my best means to which of exercise. Like that's what I enjoy doing the most. But if I was to getting into lifting or getting into CrossFit or whatever it might be, if I was to walk into Absolute Nutrition, I would have absolutely no clue what I need, what's good, what's bad, what is best fit. Do you see that as like as you've continued to grow and expand, is there more of an educational element to the business now than there was when you first started?
Yeah, so I didn't really mention it, but that was kind of always my focus from day one, is be that knowledge source, right? And be the place that people can come into and ask the question to get better understanding. I would say in 2009, we had a much less informed consumer, and they would come in, and I used to kind of make the joke about needing to handhold people and kind of walk them around the store down to like even picking what their flavor should be, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of silly because that's such a personal preference thing. But I could answer any question that someone had almost, right? And I could lead them through why a product was better than another, down to the milligrams of ingredients that were effective. And so that's the approach I've typically taken with my team over time. But also, I will say that, I've been a little too set it and forget it. And so here's training procedures, here's product knowledge. And then for a while, we don't touch it. Well, the industry is ever evolving. There's new ingredients hitting the market. There's new products hitting the market. And so I found myself having to go back and rewrite these playbooks, make edits in them. Even in the last 2 months here, I've gone back and kind of flipped the script again. We've implemented some new things. I've started changing the way we go about training and product training because I feel like I was doing a disservice to my team. A lot of my stuff was outdated, or it was just not something that they were connecting with the same. But at the same time now, here in 2023, we have a much more informed consumer, right? Yeah. There are people that come in the stores that might know as much or more than my team at times, which is interesting, right? And so then you kind of wonder, well, where do I fit anymore? But the fact of the matter is, a lot of times they're also misinformed. And, I think you see that with a lot of industries, right? But so our approach is still to be that knowledge source, cut through the red tape, but then also try to help them make good decisions. Sometimes the knowledge that my team is recommending to people has nothing to do with the product on the shelf, right? It's talking to them about how they're going to help recover from a specific injury, because we've talked to 100 other people that have the same injury or had this surgery, right? Or have the same nagging pain, right? We've had a lot of experience. Maybe it's personal, maybe it's anecdotal with other customers over this time that we relay to people, right? Even implementing into like what their dietary outlook should look like, between what their macros should be based around, to weight, small tips and tricks and hacks to get around certain things. I can even remember giving somebody kind of a fast food diet. I've got a friend of mine that's super picky. She's super picky. She actually worked for me several years ago. Gosh, it's been over a decade at this point. And I made a fast food diet for her, which sounds silly, but when you understand that someone's lifestyle is they are not going to prep food, all that you have are what is available from someplace they can buy it. And so that's when you recommend, the turkey barbecue sandwich with half the bun, because it's a wheat bun, it's a lean meat, right? You're trying to find options for them that they're never going to be that 100% what you would want somebody to follow in an ideal world, but they're going to be so much better. It works for them, and it's so much of a better situation than what they're doing currently. So finding those things where you can lead people to success is not always about what we've got on the shelf or what we're selling, right? We're helping people, and we're helping people in a lot more than just the products that we're selling them. We're trying to help them make lifestyle changes.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking through, in the last few years, a big part I mentioned at the beginning of this, when we kind of like set up the stage of who I was talking with, it was that the online stores it's probably plays a pretty big role in the growth and the success of Absolute Nutrition. Has that always been the case, or when did you kind of see that being a kind of, it's like almost your fourth location? It's like you have your 3 physical locations and your 4th location is online. Like, did that become a priority in the last few years, or is that something that you've always kind of seen the value of it and you've just been trying to implement it over the last 10, 12 years?
Yeah, so to be honest, the online store, I've never really focused on the true value it can provide, but it's also a very crowded marketplace. So I am one in a sea of many national brands, local brands, whatever else. And there are still some stores that I'm friends with that refuse to go online.
Wow.
Because they feel like their brick and mortar is their thing. And while that is our lifeblood, there is opportunity for the online side too. But most often I find that our online store provides an extension for our customers. I've got customers who have moved away that still shop with us. I've got customers who are overseas. We've got customers who can't make it in this week, so they ship it to their home, right? And so that it has been an extension of what we do. And nowadays where we have a lot more two-way communication through platforms like that too, we're still answering questions through that as well. Obviously, I would love to be able to spend more intimate time with these people to ask the right questions and really toss the ball back and forth and make sure we're heading in the right direction. But for the customers who are very familiar with us and what we do and the products that we carry, it has been an additional help for that, especially during the pandemic times.
Yeah. It's what's crazy. Most small business owners and businesses themselves fail. It's not a market that people are like everyone, I think, wants to be a small business owner, has some desire, maybe not everybody, but the people that are interested in it, there's a lot that try and do it and then maybe just don't succeed and don't see the fruits of their labors as well. You've been in this 14 years. That's often unheard of for small business owners. And you've seen the expansion too over the last, with multiple locations and trying this location, maybe it didn't work, or trying this and it didn't work. How do you go about when you try those things over this journey and over this huge, career you've had to try these things and then they fail? And does that set you back, or does that just fuel you to try new things and continue to push ahead?
I think a strong suit for myself is that I'm always trying new things. And so at any given time, I'm trying 5 or 6 new things. And so if 1 or 2 of them fails, then it's just, a couple in a sea of many. And I think that not getting too hung up on those failures and crying about them or just, more or less getting down on your luck and just feeling like you are a failure, letting them be too personal, is important, because you're going to have a lot of failures. There's no way to avoid them. And you can obviously approach things more intelligently to try to eliminate as much failure, but no matter what, you're going to hit failures. And I've referred to that before as micro failures. And so you can have lots of micro failures and still be okay. You look at the stats for small businesses and how often they fail and in what time frame of conception that they fail, and it starts to become very nerve-wracking. And so you can focus on that and think, if I do this and it doesn't work out, I'm done. And I promise you, I've probably had that thought in my head in the last 6 months, right? This is it. I messed up. And over the last 14 years, so many times where I'm like, I made the final mistake. This is the final needle in the haystack kind of thing. Like, I am done. And it has not been the case, because it was just another failure in a sea of many. And so you have to be okay with failing. You have to be okay with trying new things that may not work out. And I think that that's really the key to being successful, is just never stop trying new things, never stop persevering, because the second that you do is when you stay stagnant and you do fail.
Yeah. Do you think you've always had this entrepreneurial mindset, or do you think that moment in the gym when you had this idea and that owner didn't want to do it, that was kind of that tipping point to say, like, I'm just going to do it myself?
I think a little bit of both. I think that I would have never considered myself as an entrepreneur before I was. Even once I was, I still didn't consider myself an entrepreneur.
Do you consider yourself one today?
I do.
Okay.
I think I finally, maybe it's not that imposter syndrome as much anymore, right? But, back in the day, I've always looked for ways I could do things better. Mm-hmm. I can remember even as a kid, my grandfather taught me to kind of solder and play with circuits and stuff. And I knew just enough to be dangerous. And my best friend that lived across the street from me had an alarm clock when we were kids, and his alarm clock was not waking him up. So I had the bright idea to take it apart and wire in headphones that he would wear to bed so that he would definitely hear his alarm.
This might be $1 million idea right here.
Well, so funny thing about those basic alarms, right? That's a piezo transducer or whatever, that it basically makes one noise when a power is applied to it, like the right? It wasn't a speaker, so wiring in headphones does not make any sense, right? It's not going to make any noise. But the second that I took it apart and wired in these headphones, and my dad came in my room and saw that I had this open circuit board that was plugged into the wall, and he took it away completely. Like, it's my friend's alarm clock; it's not even mine, and he took it away. and would not let us have it back because he was afraid it was going to be a fire. And so it's funny, just even seeing then, I was looking for opportunities to make things better. In high school at some point, I got an alarm system put in. They would not put remote start on my car because it was a manual transmission vehicle. So I said, okay, I'm going to look it up and figure out how to do it. And I later figured out the hard way why they don't allow you to do that. And that's because if you leave it in gear, it will run over you. But at that point, I did also have an opportunity to put in several alarm systems for friends, right? I like told them a price and put this thing in my garage and somehow convinced my mom to let me keep a car in the garage for a day or two while I put an alarm system in their car, right? And so I was always looking for ways to do things better or like fix things and just opportunity, I guess, in some ways. And so I think that ability has changed over time. And so that has come into finding ways to do things better as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, right? But it's never really been about the money. And I, it's almost, it's weird to say that because everybody's like, oh, well, of course it's about the money. I have bills to pay. My team has bills to pay. Yeah. We have to make money. We have to make a lot of profit just to pay the overhead, right?
100%.
But at the end of the day, it's fun to hit a new sales goal. It's fun to hit a new marker of any kind, but it is less fun if you have unhappy customers or you're not successful in what you do. And so the amount of times where I have explained or instructed my team not to oversell a product when someone does not need it, I can't count it because I am very serious about making sure that we are selling things that make a difference and not trying to push things just to make a sale. And so I would say that is a very difficult thing when you're trying to teach people to sell and to fix things. You have to teach them to be solution providers and to ask the right questions and to really consider what this person needs rather than I'm going to get a big average ticket and Matt's going to be proud of me, right?
Yeah. Which is, because I think you see the extremes of people that aren't maybe small business owners or entrepreneurs themselves that are in this career that they, dreamed of having, and they've just worked their way up the corporate ladder and they're making a ton of money, but they're the most unhappy person. And I think there's two things, and I say it all the time. There's two things you do more than anything in your entire life, and that's sleep and work. And so you might as well have a job you really enjoy and a bed you like to sleep on because you're going to do that a ton. And so even if you're if the money is the fuel for why you do the job, just so you can have all these other things, it's then you're probably doing it for the wrong reasons. And I think it's tough for people to hear, especially even for coming from you as a successful entrepreneur, small business owner, have multiple companies to say, the money is not the issue. But I think, like you said, you're solving the problem up front. And I think when you provide value up front, everything else kind of works itself out.
Yeah, and there's a famous Steve Jobs quote too about you have to love what you do because anybody would be crazy to do something that they didn't love because of the amount of time and stress it takes on you. And so there was definitely a large period of years where I was happier and made more money personally as a single store owner than I did when I had 3 or 4. Yeah. It was just 6+ years where I was just in the grind, making less money than I did before, super stressed, right? And just not sure it was going to make it. And so if you don't actually care about what you do and why you're doing it, you would give up because it doesn't make any sense to continue in that.
It sounds crazy.
That's a lot of my years of my life where I was unhappy and just struggling getting by because it was just so hard at what I did. But I felt like there was another side to that eventually. And it wasn't one of those things like where just one day things opened up, the sun was shining and then everything was okay again, right? It's a very slow process. And so I think that there are bright spots throughout those dark times that keep you motivated. But again, you really have to like what you do. If you're just doing it for the dollars, man, you could stop and do anything else and make more money sometimes. And so you really have to, if you're pursuing something of your own, you really have to care about what you're doing and why you're doing it for it.
Yeah, thinking about this 14-year journey, you've been successful with Absolute Nutrition, been successful with Apparel Lab, which we've also had on the podcast a couple of years ago. How much of your success would you have contributed to being in the right place at the right time versus how much would you contribute to your hard work?
That's a great question. I think it has to be a pretty heavy mesh of both. Timing-wise, as I mentioned, the market was very different in 2009 when I started. While it was not a time where there were a lot of new businesses blossoming, it was also a time where there were not a lot of new businesses blossoming, right? And so it provided me an opportunity to be a diamond in the rough, right? There weren't just businesses popping up all around Decatur, Alabama, right? Not that weren't restaurants or fast food chains. And so, being able to be singled out at that time, being able to use social media as a leverage tool back then before it was pay for play, everything got seen by all of your followers, right? Yeah. And so I can remember even as that one store, we had a couple thousand followers, like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, somewhere in there.
And they're all seeing it.
And they're all seeing my posts, and I'm making awful posts every day, but I did it every single day. And, you know, that was how we gained traction, right? People are seeing these things. They're following these things. As soon as I see somebody, I'm liking their page. I can remember an old college acquaintance of mine who was a friend of mine on the early years of Facebook. And he literally messaged me or said something to me in person one time, like, Matt, I am not going to like your page. Will you stop inviting me to it? No. And because I was relentless, someone adds me as a friend, I'm sending them an invite to Absolute Nutrition, right? Any little edge I can have to grow it. And so timing wise, it was just a different time where there were a lot of tools that worked to my advantage. But then fast forward years later, and my approach isn't working anymore. Yeah. So you have to go back and revisit it, right? As far as timing and locations, a lot of those locations worked out because of the timing for them. Some of them didn't work out. Our newest Madison location, we relocated a couple of years ago. The timing worked out great for our relocation of that to be in a great space for us. One of the best moves we made in years. Same thing for our Huntsville location when our lease ended at the old spot. We'd been there 5 years. I had really kind of played coy with the idea of whether I was going to renew or not until the landlord basically said, you have 18 days. I've already got someone else signed to be in here. And so then the pressure was on for me to find another spot and move quickly unless I wanted to close the location. And so, you know, timing is a little bit of everything for sure. But, you know, even in that 18 days, right, it is impossible to relocate and build a business in 18 days unless you're willing to work 100-hour weeks. So the amount of grit and drive it takes, you cannot find crews to turn a space that quickly. Yeah. So if you need to go revamp an entire space to build a business in that period of time, I can remember Nusha from Crumpleton being like, I cannot believe you pulled this off, right? But it was just one of those things where I didn't sleep for 2.5 weeks.
This has to be done for us to be successful and us to be able to provide value. So it's going to be done. And then I think what's wild, and I think I see it so much. And what I do is that when you put deadlines on things, it almost just forces you to just make it happen. And it's crazy how much you can get done with a deadline versus how much you can get. It's the whole idea too. Like if you'd write a business plan in 2009, someone would have been breathing down your neck. You would have to have a teacher because you needed some sort of push, and not necessarily the push to do it, but the push to get it done in a timely manner. And I think the same thing applies to even at any level of an entrepreneur. There's sometimes things that come up that you're like, you have a strict deadline for that you're able to get it done a lot quicker that way.
Exterior forces can be a major push for good. And, you know, I think that, like you said, having a deadline on things is great, especially for someone who tends to want to procrastinate. You know, I was married just a couple months ago here, and, you know, for months, my wife kept asking me, like, are you working on your vows? Are you working on your vows? And I'm like, yeah. And I've given some thought to them. Yeah. Nothing's on paper. And I literally did not pick up the pen, Clark, until the night before the wedding. And we left the rehearsal dinner. I went home. The house was to myself. And I sat in front of my computer. And for 2 hours, I just wrote. And I wrote from the heart. And I edited and reread. And they were perfect. And so in 3 hours, I came up with the best version of which I would not have been able to do over the months. Because if I had put pieces and bits together, it's just not how I operate. Like I said, when I do something, I go all in, I put full throttle. And so I knew that I was able to do that. You know, I'm very comfortable with my skill set at this point to where I can do those things and kind of push it a little last minute. And then I also know when there's other times where, hey, you need to be a little more prepared because you need to be able to make some edits to this. That was not one of those times. How I feel from the heart, it's all in one moment, right? I need to be able to be in tune with that. You can't be in tune with it when you're having a stressful day, right? Or you didn't sleep well last night. Like those are not times where you can be in tune with those things. So you need to find the time where your mind is right to do it. But I say all that to say is, yes, having other pressures will force you to move forward in some way, form, or fashion.
Yeah, I mean, so just thinking through this, I mean, it seems like now the conversation that we've had about like what it's looked like in the business and Absolute Nutrition over the last couple of years, you know, you've really kind of transitioned your role within the company. It seemed like the first couple of years you were really rainmaker. You were just trying to not necessarily make the money for the business, but make sure the business is staying afloat. And now you've kind of transitioned to almost like architecting what the business itself is doing. You're helping to run. What does your day-to-day look like now in the business for Absolute Nutrition, the other company with Apparel? Like, what does your day-to-day look like now versus maybe even what it looked like 6 months ago, a year ago, and then even way back to 2009?
I would say that I still go through alternating phases of being much more involved in the operations of the business and stepping back out. You know, depending on the people that you have working with you, a lot of times they can kind of cover some of those overlaps or gaps that maybe you feel like that is your position, but really it's just where you've found or put yourself. And then you find good people who can take those tasks from you and run with them, but you don't always have those people. Sometimes those people transition in and out over a period of 2 or 3 years. And so I have found myself really trying to put myself back in the driver's seat and go, look, you have to consider what these team members need from you. I'd say more than anything I've done in the last 14 years, I am very people focused at this time about what all of my team members at both companies need from me. How can I make them better? I've had very frank conversations with several of them saying, like, if you leave here today, I don't feel good about your next step because I haven't given you very much. You have not learned much here like I want you to learn. And if you'll give me more time, I will help you get better. And that wasn't a conversation where they said, hey, Matt, see you later. That was one of those conversations where I felt like they were burned out or they weren't present, and I knew I was not investing them. Yeah. And so I took it personally as like, everyone that I've had leave here and be successful, I was able to spend a lot of time with and give them the best parts of me. And so I've got to make sure I do that with you too, because that's my responsibility. If I make you better as a person for your next job and your next career, we will also benefit from it here, but then I will feel accomplished. I don't feel accomplished by what you did here for our customers and for the business itself. I mean, there are definitely things where I'm like, hey, I'm so glad this person put this into place, yeah. Right? But when I see an individual develop and become a better leader, learn new skills, that is probably the most rewarding thing about being in my position now. And so I try to really push myself to press on that hard and take it personally and be responsible for their personal development, because it is on me. And, you know, you're not always going to have the single most driven individuals that are in those places that will just continue to get better and thrive and rise to the level of the expectations of their job. That's just not it. Sometimes you got to push. I'm that not so exterior force, right? Yes. So I'm that force for them, pushing them to be better. And sometimes it ends up being butting heads. But there have been plenty of people, both employees that have been with me for a long time or even employees that I have had to let go, who have come back and thanked me for that. And so to me, that is what my job is.
Yeah. I mean, I think I mentioned it. What's crazy is, you know, thinking, I mean, I've done a lot of episodes and I'm thinking through, and there's a thing that I learned a lot in the episode we did with her for Apparel Lab that I think I even see overlapping in Absolute Nutrition. And it's that of, you really try and learn every aspect of the business because you don't want to get your employee into that role and them come to you and you not know how to help them. And I think that is just absolutely amazing. And I mention it I mention it very often. Of one of the things I learned from the Apparel Lab was that you really want to make sure you not necessarily are an expert in everything, but you know enough to be helpful. And I learned a lot about that in the Apparel Lab, and I even see that a lot in Absolute Nutrition. And I think that's a huge, huge, huge reason that you've been so successful over the last 14 years. That Absolute Nutrition is because you really, you maybe got into that role not knowing, so you had to learn everything, but now you're able to be really helpful for your team members and be able to make sure that they can be the best employee that they can be. And I think that's amazing. If anyone's listening and they want to connect with Absolute Nutrition, they want to find out more, they want to visit your locations, they want to look at you online, where can they find you? Where are you?
Yeah, so our website is absolutenutritiononline.com. Obviously, our shop is there. There's some blog posts that I've written or other team members have written, and then our location pages as well. And then our Facebook is just facebook.com/absolutenutrition. So
awesome. Yeah, and all their little information, their website, their social media links will be in the episode notes. You can definitely find that out there. But thank you so much for sitting down talking with me. I love learning more about your story, the story of Absolute Nutrition, the story of you being an entrepreneur now that you kind of consider yourself to be one. So that's amazing to see. And I continue to look forward to the success that Absolute Nutrition will have in Huntsville, Decatur, Madison, maybe even many more locations in the years to come. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Clark. Appreciate you being here.